Gene, please take it over.
As Siraj said, this is being recorded, and at the end of, so you don't have to worry about trying to take notes. Usually I talk faster than I can keep up with myself. We'll send out a list of links to various and sundry things, including the video at the end of this. So um, sit back, relax, and we'll see where this goes. I should tell you that every time I do one of these, I shuffle the slides, so it tends to be sort of a new experience as opposed to a continuous regurgitation of exactly the same thing over and over again. For those of you who don't know me already, I am I host the Systems Thinking in Action discussion group on LinkedIn, and I spend a lot of time developing content, helping other people to understand systems thinking and the value of it. So I'd like to spend the next hour and share some of my current thoughts about systems thinking, which have evolved over a rather long period of time. I tell people that um, after spending decades of having people ask me what I did, and as I began to tell them and could see their eyes glaze over as in their mind they're saying, oh, why did we ask? And how do I get him to stop? And how do I get out of here? One day somebody asked, and before I answered, all of a sudden, what came out was rather unexpected. I said, we figure out how to solve problems so they stay solved and not create new ones in the process. And the person said, wow, I want to know more. And I was speechless because that had never happened before. So I'm going to share with you sort of what has evolved in terms of how to demystify systems thinking. It's, you know, we've been at it since the 30s, and people still spend a lot of time talking about why is it that more people aren't adopting systems thinking? Why isn't it more broadly adopted and addressed and used? And the the answer to that is pretty much in this picture. We have met the enemy and he is us. I continue to tell people that the greatest impediment to the adoption of systems thinking is systems thinkers. And the predicament is sort of like this. Consider a situation where I sit down in the morning and have breakfast and and I watch the birds outside on the railing, and it creates a rather pleasant feeling in the morning. And this happens several mornings in a row. And so I decide that I like that. So it encourages me to install a bird feeder. And that's the extent of my thought. Though what I didn't realize when I installed the bird feeder was that, well, I installed the bird feeder and it increased the number of birds at the feeder, which improved the pleasant morning, which is what I wanted. So I'm moving in the right direction. Though at the same time, the birds at the feeder increase the attractiveness of the garden, which is also a good thing, which attracts more birds and adds to the pleasant morning. So we're on a roll here, right? And the pleasant morning helps me deal with the frustration that I typically have on an ongoing basis, and that frustration used to detract from the pleasant morning. So this is also good. So what I failed to think about was that all of these birds increases the need for me to buy bird seed, and bird seed is far more expensive than I realized and thought about. So continuing to buy bird seed adds to my frustration. And the birds at the feeder increases the spillage, which increases the need to buy bird feed, which adds to my frustration. And the bird feeder attracts squirrels, you know, the universal eating machine that never stops. And that decreases the birds at the feeder, which doesn't add to the pleasant morning situation. Well, unless you really like to watch squirrels chase birds. But the squirrels increase the need to buy bird seed because they eat the bird seed, and they increase the spillage, which increases the need to buy bird seed. So there's simply more frustration. And the spillage attracts rodents, which increases the frustration. And the spillage also promotes unsightly growth around the bottom of the bird feeder, which is something I have to figure out how to take care of, which increases the frustration. And the birds poop all over the railing, which is something I have to figure out how to clean up. And all of this happened just because I want to increase my pleasant morning. All of this is there whether we choose to think about it or not. So it's a question of systems of the victim or victims of the system. It's there. The relationships exist. And I often say that it's a lot like playing chess. I can learn the moves on the chessboard and I can think about what I can move, and when my opponent moves, I move. Or some people think about, well, if I move this piece and they move this piece, then this is going to happen, and I can play a couple of moves ahead. And some people play all the way to an end game. If you, in fact, spend time to understand the relationships, you have a better sense of the implications of your actions, as opposed to, well, if I do this, it will produce this result. Because we have learned that we can seldom do just one thing. There are multiple implications of almost any action that we take. So, and the advantage of doing this is that every time I have presented this to someone else, not to show them how smart I am, but because from having another person's perspective on this set of interactions, they ask a whole bunch of questions that I didn't think about. And it tends to extend the understanding of the set of interactions so that there is a better realization of what should in fact be considered before I act. Not that one should spend an eternity doing analysis and therefore never getting anything done, though at least doing more than we typically do, because we are in fact, for the most part, our own worst enemies. It's often commented that almost all of today's problems are the result of yesterday's solutions. Though the way that we look at it, if we look at a situation, an event that happened, it appears as though it's an event, and the diagram that's typically used in the systems thinking community is this iceberg model, where the events are the tip of the iceberg. It's what we experience, but there are really a pattern of trends that lead up to that event. It's just that we lead very busy lives and we don't have time to pay attention to everything around us, so that we don't pay attention to these patterns of behavior that are evolving over time that end up producing this event. If I go in and turn on the water in the bathtub and I watch the bathtub fill, I can see the series or the trend of the water filling the bathtub, and I understand that there's a trend leading up to the current state. If I turn on the water in the bathtub and go away for a half hour and come back and the bathroom's flooded, it looks like an event, but it's not. There are actually underlying structures that are responsible for that pattern of behaviors that lead up to the current event. And there are reasons that those structures exist. And if I am to effectively deal with a situation, it is appropriate, it is in my best interest to understand that context, that structure. My own preference is to replace this diagram with one that says there are patterns of behavior that lead up to that, and there is some set of interacting components that are responsible for those patterns of behavior. But the key part, and this is where we often run into trouble, because we look at this pattern of interactions and we decide that we want to change it. But this pattern of interactions is like, it's like dozens of slinkies connected together, and if you just reach into the midst of it and pull on one, well, you can change the configuration of this collection of slinkies, but as soon as you let go of it, it goes back to the way it was. And the reason that it goes back to the way it was is because this collection of interactions is the result of the motivations and beliefs of a set of stakeholders who created this pattern of interactions. And they typically operate with these mental models about what it is that they're creating. They're typically not lined up on what they're doing. They're all in the process of designing something different based upon their own personal motivations and belief, and we just do it to ourselves on an ongoing basis. So to give you an additional perspective on this, this is probably a very different view of a home heating system than you've ever looked at before. But if I simply think about it's colder outside than it is in the house, so that I set the thermostat so that the thermostat in the current temperature, there's a gap, and that induces the thermostat to run and warm up the house. It's called a balancing loop, and it's meant to maintain the comfort that I'm interested in, so that if I look at what I consider desired comfort in the current temperature, it causes me to set the thermostat someplace, and it balances out over time. But at the same time that that is happening, there's another loop in play where I set the thermostat and the furnace runs and it consumes energy, and I have what I consider an acceptable cost. So that cost, in fact, influences me to turn the thermostat down because it ends up being a lot of money. But there's a delay in the sequence here in that I turn up the thermostat and I warm the house, but what it's costing me to do that, I don't find out until I get the bill later. So what, excuse me, so what ends up happening is that I end up oscillating back and forth so that I have a desired comfort, so I turn the thermostat up, and then that interferes with my acceptable cost, so I turn the thermostat down, so it impacts my desired comfort, so after a while I turn the thermostat back up, and I just go back and forth. So I end up in a twist or a oscillating cycle that there's no escape from. Well, the reason there's no escape from is because I haven't looked at the rest of the set of interactions. The way out of the predicament is that you can't get here from there. The solution is actually outside of the set of interactions that I was considering, in that if I really want to reduce my cost, I should move to warmer climate. No, I have to do something about what it is that's causing the money that I'm spending on heat actually leaking out of the house. And the leverage point in the whole model is the leakage in the house. So maybe I could figure that out from drawing the picture, and maybe I could figure that out from drawing the picture and explaining it to someone else and having them appraise me of the situation as parts that I missed and wasn't understanding. So, but what we end up with here is a static qualitative picture. There is a limit to what we can know. I mean, it's really, if you look at the bird feeder dilemma and you look at the set of interactions, by spending time and thinking about the interactions, I know more about what I'm embedded in than if I just decided that it was a pleasant morning and I installed the bird feeder and I dealt with the consequences. It's a qualitative picture. There's nothing associated. I mean, it's okay as long as I don't ask how much. Consider a situation where this is a picture that describes an interaction between a population of moose and wolves, so that I know that moose births create more moose and death create fewer moose, and wolf births create more wolves and death reduces the population. And there's a relationship between them because the moose serve as food for the wolves, and the moose actually interfere with, or because of the moose being food for the wolves, they tend to increase the population. But if I look at this with regard to some numbers associated with the pieces, if I take this piece alone and look at it, there's, and forget about what the numbers are. It's just the idea that if I looked at the moose population alone and looked at the interactions, it tells me that over a period of 100 years, I should have about 1.3 billion moose, which is, highly ridiculous. But then if I look at the wolves population by itself with a certain set of parameters and look at the moose or the wolf population over 100 years, it tells me that the wolf population will essentially die out over time. Though if I study the interaction of those two populations together, what I find out is that the structure does something completely unexpected in that it actually oscillates, in that there's a benefit between the two structures that causes them, both populations, to survive over time, even though at any particular instance one population is not really good for the other one, or they are, and it changes. So that there are times when qualitative pictures are good, though quantitative pictures are essential if we ask particular questions. And it has been claimed, and I think essentially proven, that it is beyond our intuitive capacity to understand the implications of one or more feedback loops. To give you an example in support of that, is this is a typical one element balancing structure where I've got a current state and a desired state, and the difference between those promotes action to move the current state in the direction of the desired state. And in the simplest form of this, here is the goal, and the current state just evolves over time until it reaches the desired state. Yet, if in this environment I inject a time delay between my actions and realizing the implications of my actions, strange things happen. So that if there's a small time delay, all of a sudden there's an overshoot in my actions, and I have to then act additionally to bring things back to where I want them. And as the time delay increases, the implications of my actions can actually cause the system to be out of control. And the only thing that I have changed between these four different images is the length of time between my actions and the realizing the implications of my action. And when people look at this, they say, well, how could you possibly not know what's happening in 4 days? Well, it's not a question of 4 days, it's a question of the relationship between the amount of action and the time that it takes to realize the implications of that action. It could be 4 days, it could be 4 minutes, or 4 microseconds, depending upon, depending upon what's interacting. So, are there any questions at this point, Suraj?
Yeah, there is one question for you.
Okay.
And this comes probably from your first slide, and where you said, you're dealing with one, or maybe the second one. Yeah. You're dealing with one
Slide.
set of bird feeder dilemma. And so Zarir asks you, would it be better to deal with the fears, doubts, and beliefs first?
Fears, doubts, and beliefs. Well, until I investigate the relationships, um, um, do I know what's there that I should have? In other words, I should begin with an awareness that I'm pretty sure that I don't automatically know what all the relationships are. And investigating it should make me more comfortable. And even though I've said that, I don't think I've actually answered the question.
Yeah, I also felt that, without an emergent experience of the bird feeder dilemma, you wouldn't know what are the real fears you have. With each experiment, you are creating new fears. Like Kevin says, people don't have fears and doubts and are not aware of their belief until they see what's happening. Thanks, Kevin. That's exactly what I was thinking too. Yep, that's it,
Okay.
Gene. You can move
All
on.
right. So at this point, you're probably wondering, is he ever going to talk about systems and systems thinking really in terms of what is it and why should I care? All right. So over the last 5 years or so, interacting with the members of the Systems Thinking and Action Discussion Group, which used to be called other things in the past, we have not actually been able to come to a consistent agreement on a definition for system, but I'm going to give you the one that I'm most comfortable with, which is at least 50 years old. If I take an entity and it has an influence on something else, and forget about what the individual things are at the moment. And as a result of that influence, it has a resulting influence back on the initiator, sort of like Newton's second law of motion, I guess. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if I act on you and you produce some action back to me as a result of that, which we label as feedback, that interaction is mutual. And what is termed as feedback depends upon where you are or who you are. I mean, is is the chicken the egg's way of producing another egg, or is the egg the chicken's way of producing another chicken? It depends upon whether you're the egg or the chicken. So a system is any entity the existence of which is maintained via the mutual interaction of its parts. And you're really hard pressed to find something that is simply a one-way interaction without any feedback. So I suppose if you thought about it long enough, you might be able to dream up one. So once you identify that interaction, you also have to identify the boundary. What is inside and what's part of the environment that it interacts with. You see, a system is actually a mental construct on the part of a person. That's not to say that the stuff doesn't exist, though what one defines to be a system is part of their definition. And I'll talk about some examples in a moment. So my advice continues to be, and my own personal reaction is every time someone says the system, my immediate comment is, what does that mean? Because I want to know what are the components that you think are interacting that form the system, and what is the boundary around them, and what is the environment that you're taking into account. Because if I don't know what you mean by the system, we're going to talk past each other on an ongoing basis, and it will be an endless source of confusion. Some examples: systems have essential components and non-essential components. If you take a car, for the most part, you can define it as some conveyance vehicle that takes you from point A to point B. There are parts of the car that are not essential to take you from point A to point B. If you take the doors off it, it'll still take you from point A to point B. Maybe not quite as safely as if you had the doors on it, but if you take the wheels off of it, it doesn't go anywhere. Is it still a car or is it a broken car? I don't care. It's still something. It's a collection of things with an intentioned purpose or an intent, and when it fulfills that intent, it's the mutual interaction of all of those components that make it what it's identified to be. If you think about a clock, it's a thing that ticks off on an amount of time, moment to moment, and if you take it apart and study all of the pieces, you can understand why it ticks at the rate that it does, so you can understand how it works. But if you look at the clock, I don't care how long you study the clock, will you ever be able to figure out why the tick is as long as it is? You know from a mechanical reason what makes it be that long, but if you ask why is it that long, there is nothing within the clock that will allow you to understand why. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But it is the mutual interaction of all those pieces that allows it to fill its purpose. The solar system and the interaction between the sun and all the planets and the moons and the way it maintains its ongoing existence over time. Or this is a terrible picture. Places. This is from Sengi's The Fifth Discipline, and it's uh, the idea of a person wanting to fill a glass with water where there's a current water level and a desired water level, which the gap induces them to open the faucet to create a water flow to cause water to fill the glass. And as it fills, once it gets to a point, they go ahead and turn the faucet off. But it's this set of interactions that allows the purpose to be fulfilled, and it's not linear. And this is the piece that at one point in history created an aha moment for me. Somewhere in probably grade school, someone told me that the whole was greater than the sum of its parts. And I probably echoed that for years and years and years, never really embracing what it meant until one day I thought about water and realized that water is composed of hydrogen and oxygen, both of which at typical room temperatures are gases. So when you combine them together and put lots in a form of a molecule and you put lots of them together, you end up with something that displays a characteristic called wetness. And if you study hydrogen and oxygen forever, you will never find a characteristic called wetness. It is only something that emerges from the mutual interaction of all of those parts, so that systems tend to, well, systems always have one or more emergent characteristics. Those are characteristics or aspects of the system that that are demonstrated as a result of that mutual interaction of the pieces. And a bank is a place that you put money and get a little bit of interest because they loan it to other people or whatever. But for a savings account, if it's a reinforcing structure where the principal accumulates interest and periodically the interest is added and it grows over time, so that the emergent characteristic of a savings account is growth, but the principal and the interest individually don't grow, though the interaction of them produces growth. This is the contrary example to all the rest of them. A pile of bricks laying on the ground is typically not considered a system, because if you take one brick away, it's still a pile of bricks laying on the ground. But if you pile the bricks up so that they support one corner of the porch, now it is more than just a pile of bricks. It has an intended purpose to hold up the corner of the porch. And if you pull one brick out, the porch falls down. So in that instance, it would be considered a system because it's a set of mutual interactions that fulfills a purpose. So that's probably more than you ever wanted to know about examples of systems. But what I talked about, boundary and environment, boundary, it's appropriate to understand, identify boundaries for two reasons. One is that, and as I'll show you, well, why don't I just talk about the next slide? Forget about that one. A situation associated with early hospital discharges. The system, from the perspective of the people who work in the hospital, has to do with admissions capacity and discharge. Though if you talk to the people in the community, demand and readmissions are the portion that they consider the system. And if you talk to the people associated with post-hospital services, the post-hospital capacity and the demand for post-hospital services is what they consider the system. If anyone is going to attempt to address the implications of the interaction of all of those pieces, it is members of the hospital, the community, and the post-hospital services that have to work cooperatively to do something about the addressable system. Back to the point that I made, where was it? Back here, about this set of interacting components, and it is the stakeholders who are responsible for that set of interactions if the situation is to be addressed. The people in the hospital could make modifications to this portion, but it's typically the interaction between groups of things that what ends up causing the problem. So when people begin to think from a systems perspective, sometimes they begin to get religion, and they say systems thinking is good and linear thinking is bad. We should never do linear thinking. It's actually a combination. They're two sides of a coin, and you can't have one without the other. Or if you attempt to do one without the other, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So that there's a context of analysis. Analysis is essentially the scientific method where we take things apart and we study the parts and we attempt to understand the whole from an understanding of the parts. But back to my comment earlier about the clock, I cannot understand how or why the clock functions the way it does without understanding the context within which the clock was designed to operate. So there's a context of synthesis, which is the environment in which the piece operates, that I also have to understand, so that one is analysis and one is synthesis, and they go together. So that if we're going to do really meaningful things, it's appropriate to do both, not one or the other. Which takes me all the way back to this slide where I said systems thinking, and you'll see this piece recur rather repeatedly. And. So I said that we've been at this for decades. Essentially, Ludwig von Bertalanffy is considered by most to be the father of modern systems theory. And his initial ideas were surfaced back in the 30s. And Weiner with cybernetics in the 40s. And they continued to evolve the concepts and ideas, though what is systems thinking is really no different in its history than all of the management fads that we've experienced over the decades. There's another one every couple of weeks. When we attempt to take a set of understanding and apply it, and when we run into situations that the understanding doesn't know how to deal with, we evolve the understanding so that as we found out that systems thinking couldn't deal with multiple perceptions and extreme complexity and inability to escape from bias, there were new methods developed. Excuse me. New methods have evolved and developed, which continues to happen over time. Though, what do you do with? I mean, it ends up being so complex and complicated that it's overwhelming, and you just want to run away and hide. What is systems thinking? Well, what is system thinking depends upon. I said there are multiple definitions of it. There is a. Bertalanffy said that systems view was a worldview. It was a mindset. It's a way you think about the world around you. And if you look at it from that perspective, you say you want to look at the big picture, and you want to think about what it is that you think, and talk about your ideas and listen to others to expand your view of what it is that you're dealing with, and be patient when you run into things that are complicated and confusing, because you have to sort them out if you're going to deal with them. And looking at things from different sides and thinking about the changes over time, the patterns of behavior that I talked about, and identify how the connections actually cause changes, the implications of those changes over time, and you look for ways to help the system work better, and you find the keys to the system. And I mean, this whole presentation is actually a prelude to the 4-hour session I'm doing at the Systems Thinking in Action conference next month. So it's, you could do this for days, and I'm trying to compress a whole bunch of just the most relevant pieces into an hour, so bear with me, sorry. So you find the ways to interact in the system where leverage points is where you get the greatest amount of improvement in the direction that you're trying to move in, and you figure out the effects of your actions and think about what happens on an extended basis, and check your results and go around again. So this is a qualitative perspective, and someone once told me that they could use this diagram to explain systems thinking to their grandmother in a grocery store, which is a pretty nice comment, actually. I found this on the Waters Foundation Systems Thinking in Schools project once upon a time. It's a real nice model. It talks about what all the pieces are, though it's kind of akin to saying math is mostly composed of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Go do it. All right. I mean, it's not enough to give you an ability to I mean, it's better than nothing, though it's tough to say this is the formula that we move forward on. How are we doing, Suraj?
Thanks a lot, Gene. We are doing very well, and we have,
Suraj is taking that.
yeah, we have quite a few
What?
questions for you.
Okay, I could take a couple.
Okay, so the first is a good comment by Jeff Dean and me. Why isn't Jay Forrester on your timeline?
Why is it what?
Jay Forrester on your timeline. The systems thinking timeline.
I don't. There's no particular reason why Forrester is not on this timeline. I
Hmm.
mean, he's started right here in the 50s. I didn't draw this picture, but I just found it someplace, and
Okay.
so I
All right.
apologize for the person who left Jay Forrester off the timeline.
Thank you.
He is an amazing contribution to
Yeah.
system dynamics.
Yeah, absolutely. And so does Donella Meadows come into this also for some of us.
Yes,
A good question here from Craig. How does complexity science fit in with systems thinking?
I'll do that on the next slide.
Okay. What are the different types of systems?
Different types of systems.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all right. There are a number of different classification schemes that people have put together for identifying systems. I'll talk about one of them in a moment, but and I can provide references to them. I'm not sure that going into a half a dozen different classification schemes at this point is really appropriate.
All right. Okay. The last one is maybe a comment from Clade. He says that he's hearing a lot of shoulds, should this and should this. Are we trying to go towards an agenda, or are we describing the system and our understanding of the system?
He's hearing a lot of what should.
Yeah, yeah.
Should I say did?
Well, I
Sorry.
think the important part is, are we as systems thinkers, is our responsibility to set an agenda or to just describe and understand the system?
No, I have an agenda. It'll be
Awesome.
here shortly.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the prodding. That's good.
All right, but I thought all the questions are great. Thank you very much, everyone. So please continue, Gene.
So I said that this should. Sorry, that, you got me thinking about what I'm saying. That's dangerous. This gives us a better sense of things that we should do. I said Berlanti said systems thinking was a worldview, and Sengi said it's a discipline. A discipline is something that you practice and evolve your skill at over time, though you need enough of a definition to know how to practice that skill. Now, over the years, when I talked about the different things that evolved, there are models and methods. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of models and methods which are consistent with the systems paradigm. So how do you make sense out of them all? And every time I want to deal with a situation, I can't hire 25 consultants that are each one of them an expert all in the different disciplines. I mean, if I I personally once thought that systems thinking was a not very grown up version of system dynamics, but that's because of where I got into this from. And over time, my perspective evolved, none more so than the work of Michael C. Jackson in the UK, which provided me a framework for figuring out how to sort of put all these pieces together or make sense out of all the pieces. And that came from considering a system either as simple or complex. Simple being a set of interactions that I could envision designing and constructing and, and are rather consistent over time. Complex being a set of interactions that I simply could not imagine designing it the way that it is. The best that I could ever hope to do is to understand it to a point where, in Meadows' terminology, I could dance with it over time. So if I take that distinction between two classes of systems, and I think about the participants who constructed this system or are responsible for constructing the way that we are going to deal with this system, and consider them to be unitary, pluralistic, or pluralist or coercive, in that unitary, the participants are relatively well aligned in terms of their objectives and goals and beliefs and ideals, so that they can get together and line up and function coherently to accomplish something, or pluralist, where they're somewhat well aligned, and when needs be, they can in fact come to an agreement and move forward with a unified effort on a particular situation, or coercive, where these people almost don't agree on anything. They are at odds with each other over almost everything. Their belief systems and value systems are totally different. If those are the three categories of participants, I end up with, in the simple unitary mode, I can do things like operations research or systems analysis or systems engineering. In that context, these approaches should be beneficial. Whereas in a unitary complex environment, system dynamics, cybernetics, all of the rest of these things are likely to be beneficial, some more so than others, depending upon the specific nature of the situation itself. When I move over into this arena, soft systems thinking is more appropriate. Things like appreciative inquiry and soft systems methodology, because I'm dealing with something that's much more amorphous. It's tough to do. It's tough to do system dynamics with a pillow, okay? Because it's not quite the same. And what you're trying to attain, in other words, you're exploring purpose to try and figure out how to align the efforts. Whereas when you move over into this arena in emancipatory systems thinking, there are some methods, but what you're trying to do is to ensure fairness amongst the participants within the interaction. And then in this arena, simply to promote diversity. I mean, problem solving in this arena is next to impossible. You figure out ways to accommodate and deal with. So I'm not saying that this is the best framework in the world. It's just the one that I have found to date that allows me to make sense out of all of these multitude of pieces. But then there's the same question about it's overwhelming. What do I do with this? And critical systems thinking is sort of the cop out that says you use whatever works. Okay, uh, I can't deal with that guidance. It's just so from my own perspective, the agenda. Well, my under or my own personal perspective is the agenda is to enable a better tomorrow, so that I have a situation that I need to figure out how to deal with. I need to understand the situation, develop a strategy, adopt the strategy, which creates a new situation, which is hopefully the new situation that I was intending to affect in the context of what I understand about reality. And each one of these pieces has lots of more pieces to it, though there's just not time to get into them today. So, though from a systems thinking perspective, there are better ways to understand the situation, to describe the situation and understand it than we have typically done in the past. And the portion that was on the first slide, which is where I said and where I talked about evolving this when I don't. Oh no, did I do that? I did. I just closed that. Hold on. Oh, okay. The way to the, the basis for developing an understanding, and this is a personal perspective, is that given the situation, I have crop eating insects which are creating crop damage, which is not a good thing because the crops. I'm a farmer, and crops are my livelihood. So based upon all of my experience to date, I know that if I apply pesticides, it will kill the crops. Though what I've also come to realize after years and years and years is that every year it seems as though I have to apply more pesticides. The situation is just getting worse. Even though the pesticides are supposed to kill the crop eating insects, it's not working. So what else is happening? Well, I know that the crop eating insects have insect births, which increases the number of crop eating insects. So that this is a reinforcing loop, which I personally don't like. It's contrary to what I'm trying to accomplish. Though if I'm killing insects, I know I'm not killing all of them, and sometimes some of them are having births. So, but is that enough to account for the fact that every year I have to spray more? So I ask myself, I look at the the elements of the interaction, and I ask myself, well, what other things are there about this, and what does this affect, and what affects this? And I continue to apply this question of and I find it, and I realize or come to find out that when I apply pesticides, insects have this nasty habit of developing an immunity to the pesticides that I use. So that actually is contrary to the killing of the action to kill the insects, which results in more insects, which leads to crop damage, and I end up with a reinforcing loop. And I haven't talked about reinforcing balancing loops in this session, and it just there wasn't enough time to fit it in here, but we'll get to it sooner or later. I'll point you to some videos. That there are It's a reinforcing loop moving me in a direction that I absolutely don't want to go. And but is that enough? What else is happening? Well, I know that once that there wasn't. I didn't have a pesticide problem before I planted all these crops. There must have been something else that was interacting here. Well, as I find out that applying pesticides kills the controlling insects that used to devour the crop-eating insects. And this creates another reinforcing loop, which moves me also in a direction that I don't want to go in. So maybe it might be better to actually promote the development of controlling insects so that they actually devoured more of the crop-eating insects and I wouldn't have to spray so much. But then I think about it and say, well, if I continue to promote the controlling insects, and they eat all the crop-eating insects, what are they going to eat next? Because I'm pretty sure they're going to still be hungry. Because if I continue to apply pesticides, how long before I actually ruin the field so that I can't grow anything? Or that it actually ruins my own water supply so I have to import water to feed my animals? Or the runoff pollutes the streams so that I end up with being in trouble with the town that's downstream from where I plant my fields, and it goes on and on and on. The essence of understanding is one question: and what does this influence, and what influences this? And when I get to a point where I have run out of things that I can figure out, I explain this to someone else. Hopefully, they will then ask questions to surface additional relevant relationships that I simply wasn't aware of. And based upon an understanding, once I develop an understanding of the situation and the context, then I can figure out an appropriate method to apply. So that's, wow, 5 minutes of unbelievable. More questions, Suraj?
Now,
Hope everybody's not napping.
no, it's I was on mute. That's why. Yeah, we just have 5 minutes, so why don't you wrap up? I don't think we have time for questions, and it's more comments that I have than questions for you.
Oh, okay. Well, so as I said, we will go ahead and send out a set of links to various and sundry things that were here. Um, all of all of the slides that you have seen are not actually slides. They are all models developed in something called Insight Maker, which is a free modeling and simulation environment, web-based. And when I say free, it's not one of those things where you can access it free for a limited usage. It's completely free. You just go to insightmaker.com and sign up for a username and password and have at it. Scott Fort Monroe and I have spent the last 4 years developing this environment because we think it needs to exist. And it rivals quite a few other pieces of software. There's also, and this is the shameless plug for a book which someone has said that everyone should read. I know I'm biased because I'm the co-author of it. It looks like a typical ebook in that you can move forward and back and you can read the content. It has a table of contents and a way to find out where you are in the book. Though, as you read the book, there are insets, and when you go to an inset, if you click on it, you find out that you are actually inside of Insight Maker, and you can interact with models. And when you close the model, you're back in the book. And not only are there just pictures, the simulations also work right in the book. So that there'll be a link to it. I mean, we're using the proceeds from this to continue to support the development of Insight Maker. And if you find a model in here that you really like, you can click, you can go to here. It will take you to the actual model inside of Insight Maker. You can clone a copy of it that belongs to you, and you can do anything that you want with it. So that, I mean, the whole idea of Insight Maker was to create an environment that encouraged people to create and share models with other people. We currently have about 22,000 users, and there are 13,000 models in the environment. We'll send you a link to that also. As I said, this is a preview to the 4-hour session that I'm doing at the Systems Thinking in Action Conference in Seattle, not in Washington, in Seattle on April 16th through the 18th. And I'm doing I still, Suraj, I still don't like this picture. It looks like a crazy person. Um, much more detail, but we'll send you a link to this environment, which actually contains all of the pieces that I've showed today, and a lot more. Are there any questions?
No,
I
that's
hope I
it.
haven't been too overwhelming. I get carried away sometimes.
I think the subject is overwhelming. Well, everyone, thank you so much for participating. Please reach out to either Gene or me if you would like to know more about the systems thinking workshop. And if you want to attend it, we can even give you a good discount on the registration fee. And also, we'll have many more webinars like this every week. So just keep in touch with us and see you again very soon. All right, Gene, thanks a lot for everything.
Okay, I'll see you on Skype in a minute.
Yeah, see you.
Bye.